I Am the Great Horse, Chapter 21, Zagros Mountains, Winter, 331 BC. Enemies in the Pass. We left Arcas's grandmother and sisters in the palace at Susa, along with most of the presents Alexander had been given by the cities we'd dominated so far. But before we set out, Arcas was marched out of the palace by two grave-faced Macedonians and lifted into one of the cages that was used to contain lions. Lady Barsine flung a look at Alexander that was the equivalent of flat ears, hitched up her skirts, and ran to comfort the prince. All the way across the plain to the mountains, the guard whispered among themselves, afraid to raise their voices. Hephaestion kept looking over his shoulder and shaking his head. Alexander stared stonily between my ears and kept me to a brisk trot. He did not speak until we reached the foothills, where he halted me to let the others catch up. "Well," he said, his voice echoing in the steep rocks. "What's wrong, gentlemen? Let's have this out now before we go any farther and I have to rely on you to watch my back." The guard glanced at one another. No one spoke. "It's not the boy's fault, Alex," Hephaestion said at last. "You'd try to run away too if you were in the hands of your father's enemy and your father was still alive. You should have left Prince Ocus with his grandmother and sisters in the palace. What's the point of dragging him along with us?" Alexander sighed. "If I'd left him in Susa, how long do you think it would be before some ambitious Persian satrap tried to use the boy to raise another army against me? It won't hurt him to travel in a cage for a while. I want to give him something to think about. It might make him appreciate how well I treat him when I decide to let him out." "Either that or he'll hate you for it." "He's my hostage. He has to learn to respect me one way or another. The Greeks learned the hard way. If necessary, Prince Ocus will learn the hard way too." Iolaus nudged Hades closer to me, frowning. "But Alex, the boy's only 9. He's still too small to—" We never find out what Iolaus was going to say, because just then a whole herd of tribesmen come sliding down the cliffs and block the road in front of us. They are wearing tattered robes over their trousers, but are armed with bright spears. They grin boldly at Alexander. The guard immediately forget their quarrel with the king and draw their swords. "Watch those cliffs!" Perdiccas shouts. "Someone ride back and warn General Parmenio there's trouble up here. Demetrius, bring that shield here and guard the king's back." Alexander squints at the men on the cliffs and he eyes the ones in the road. He holds up his hand. "Wait, gentlemen. They're not Darius's men." "Who are you?" he demands. Their boss swaggers forward and makes a deep, mocking bow. In heavily accented Greek, he says, "We are Uxian people. This is our road. All travelers who pass must pay toll." I give him flat ears and he backs up a step. The guard are still nervous, but Alexander smiles. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, your majesty. You are King Iskander, the Macedonian demon with wild hair who flies through the air. But your men not fly. If you want to bring them through our pass, you have to pay toll. Great King Darius pays." Alexander raises an eyebrow at Hephaestion. He is still smiling, but his eyes are like chips of stone. "And how much is this toll?" The Uxian looks back down the road, sizing up our army. 1 horse, 5 mules for every 1,000 men." The guard frown as they try to work this out. "That's a lot of horses," Alexander says, still smiling. "I can't spare that many, and we're going to need all our mules for carrying the treasure away from Persepolis. Do you know how big my army is?" His voice is quiet. The silly Uxian does not know how dangerous this is. "It must be very large army if you defeat great King Darius. Maybe 100,000 men? That make 100,000 horses. 100 horses, 500 mules." He eyes me, puts his head on one side, and grins at King Alexander. "Or perhaps we just take your big black horse and 500 mules. People say you are a great king now, so you afford to pay. It is only way you ever be as great as King Darius." That was a mistake. Alexander's hand tightens on my rein. He breathes faster. Hephaestion winces, draws his sword, and rides Petassios closer to me. Petassios' red ears flatten, and he gives a little squeal, arching his neck, ready to fight. But Alexander has grown a lot more confident since Tyre and controls his temper. He narrows his eyes at the Uxian boss. "Your guess is close, but I'll have to make a head count of my baggage train to make it fair. I lose count of my camp followers. Go wait for me up in the pass, and I'll come to you with my horse. Then I give you my word as a great king and son of Zeus that you'll receive the payment you deserve from my own hand." The Uxian grins, bows again, then he and his men vanish back up the cliffs. "You're not really going to give him Bucephalus?" Hephaestion says, horrified. "Did you hear me say I would give him my horse?" Alexander runs a hand down my neck, while I dance and snort indignantly. "I'll certainly ride Bucephalus up there, but my hand will have a sword in it when I do, so will yours. It won't be my army that pays this toll. The Uxians will pay it with their blood." The guard grin at one another and sit up straighter, but Hephaestion is less happy. "They might be able to hold the pass against us, Alex. We don't know how narrow it is yet. We'll force our way through eventually, of course, but they could kill a lot of our men first." Alexander laughs, his eyes glittering with mischief. "That's why we're not going to use the pass, gentlemen. Go find me someone who knows these mountains and get Craterus up here. It's time for him to prove he can lead those men I gave him." I shiver all over, sensing that there will be a battle soon. The nerve of it, expecting Alexander to give me to them for passing through their mountains. Alexander refused to pay the Uxian toll because he would never give me away. But 500 mules would have been no great loss. Dominating the Uxians. That night, Craterus' men climb up and hide on the heights above the pass while we follow our guide around to the other side along a steep, stony track. It is cold at the top and the cliffs fall away beneath us, but we had trained in the mountains of Macedonia and not one of us put a foot wrong. Behind us, we have Attilus's archers, the mighty javelin throwers, the Amazons, and the pick of the cavalry. As the sky pales, we gallop down through the sleepy Uxian villages. Alexander's sword cuts down tents while I leap ropes and scatter their flocks of sheep with my teeth and heels. Their old men stagger out into the mist, wiping sleep from their eyes. Their women and children scream and flee. We don't bother chasing them. We continue down to the far side of the pass where we pause to regroup. The Uxian warriors who had squealed at us the previous day are just visible in the mist. Most of them are still rolled up in their cloaks, asleep. The rest sit on rocks with their spears across their knees, looking the wrong way. Alexander smiles, puts a finger to his lips, and sends Attalus with his archers up the cliffs to cover us. Then he walks me slowly forward. When we're close enough, Alexander glances around at the guard and grins. He raises his sword over his head, digs his heels into my ribs, and yells, "Ah-la-la-la-la-la!" as if he has the entire army behind him. The sleeping Uxians spring up in alarm and grab their spears. Those who are already awake shout in horror as we gallop out of the mist. They take one look at me, charging toward them with Alexander on my back, and run in all directions. Our arrows bring down a few. Some of them scramble up the rocks where Craterus' men are hiding, and there's a confusion of screams and whirling ghosts as they run into the Macedonian javelins. The Uxian boss and the rest of his herd flee back down the pass. Laughing in delight at the way his trick worked, Alexander puts his heels in my sides and urges me after them. Hephaestion shouts for him to wait, but Alexander is glowing with the excitement of battle, and my blood is up. We catch up with the Uxian boss, and I knock him down with my shoulder as I gallop past. Alexander leans down from my cloth and slices the boss's right arm with his sword. That's for blocking my road, he shouts. Then he wheels me around and slices the boss's left arm. And that's for suggesting I'm not as great as King Darius. He raises his sword a third time. And this is for daring to demand that I give you my horse, Persepolis. The Uxian boss closes his eyes. Please, King Iskander, he shrieks, not kill me. I know where Persians hide in mountains to attack your army. I help you. Alexander pauses. As the guard pull up around us, panting, he lowers his sword and gives the prisoner a thoughtful look. How many Persians? He snaps. The Uxian peers up at Alexander and says slyly, we collect 25 horses, 125 mules from one of the great king's satraps 7 days ago. Alexander's eyes narrow. He frowns at the cliffs. There are 25,000 Persians in these mountains. Are you lying to me? No, your majesty, why would I? They go high into high mountains, not come out. They take old trade routes through the Persian gates to Persepolis. Let me live. I show you the secret pass, a shortcut. Get you through the mountains a lot quicker. The Uxian manages a grin through his pain. Good trick with pass, King Iskander. Maybe you use same trick on Persians. Alexander puts away his sword and orders Leonidas to take the Uxian boss up onto Borealis. As he stretches the kinks out of his shoulders, he eyes the snow-capped mountains with a challenging smile. You're not really thinking of taking the army up through the Persian gates, Alex, Hephaestion whispers. 25,000 men could hold that pass against us till next winter. We can't leave 25,000 Persians to cause trouble in these parts, my friend. Besides, if they learn we've taken the long way around, they'll simply head on through the pass and evacuate Persepolis before we get there. If Charmides is in their hateful city, I'm not going to let them keep her. It'll take forever to get the baggage train through in this weather, Alex, says Ptolemy, frowning at the white peaks. Then we won't take the baggage train. But, Alexander laughs and gives Ptolemy a playful slap on the arm. Where's your sense of adventure gone, gentlemen? Remember what fun we had with the Thracians and the Illyrians back in Macedonia? Yet now you're scared to follow me into these tame mountains to deal with a few frightened Persians? You'll soon be advising me to turn around and go home like General Parmenio always is. We're not scared, Alex, Hephaestion says quietly. You know we'd follow you to the ends of the earth. We're just looking out for you. It only takes one stray javelin or a lucky arrow. Remember what happened at Gaza. It'd be much safer to keep the army together, take the long route, and deal with the Persians when we get to Persepolis. That's why I command the army, and not you. Alexander is still flushed from dominating the Uxians. The son of Zeus fears no earthly weapon. I have nearly 80,000 men. I hardly need them all to assault a pass. We'll take the young men who still have an appetite for adventure, and General Parmenio can take the rest, with the baggage train, around the slow way. Hephaestion sighs. At least let poor Prince Arcas out of that cage first. I'm sure he's learned his lesson by now. But Alexander shakes his head as he gathers up my reins. With General Parmenio's record of letting prisoners escape? No, my friend. The boy stays safely locked up until we get to Persepolis, which won't be long now, gentlemen. The Persian crown is within our grasp. Dominating the Persians. Surprisingly, General Parmenio hardly squealed at all when King Alexander told him of his plans to divide the army so he could dominate the Persians in the mountains. But he glanced at the Uxian prisoners being sent back to Susa and said Arcas's grandmother would be upset because she had a soft spot for the tribe. Alexander said that's why he hadn't killed their boss and was instead paying him to guide him into the mountains. This was, as you know, a lie. The Uxian boss didn't get any payment that I saw, unless you count a few extra days of life. We marched over those icy mountain tracks for 5 days, leading a herd of 20,000 men. Philotas, given the choice of coming with us or going with his father, wavered a bit, but then came galloping after us on Zephyr with his little herd at his heels. Alexander smiled grimly and patted my neck. See, Bucephalus, even Philo knows old Parmenio's days are numbered. The road was narrow and stony, twisting up over steep ridges. It grew colder as we climbed. We trotted through patches of snow and splashed across icy fords, snorting particles of ice into the air. Above us, the peaks were white. On the 5th day, we made camp at the mouths of the pass they call the Persian Gates. Since we didn't have our grooms, Alexander settled me himself and gave me my nosebag. It grew bitterly cold. We horses huddled up close in the horse lines, mares and stallions together, while flurries of snow drove down the pass and melted on our backs. There was no squealing because we were all far too miserable to make trouble. When it grew dark, the guard came back with some little leather bags clumsily sewn. Working by torchlight, Alexander picked up my feet, one by one, and tied a bag around each hoof. Then he bridled me and put on my cloth. Our riders extinguished their torches, and we set off up a steep, narrow path, following our Uxian guide. My legs ached from stepping high through snowdrifts, but the leather bags kept ice from balling in our hooves, so none of us slipped. We were a shadowy ghost herd, creeping through the starlit mountains, leaving bands of our warriors on the way. The Amazons at the campsite, with the instructions to burn enough fires for all of us. Attalus and 3,000 archers at the top, above the sleeping Persians. Philotas and 7,000 cavalry at the far side, with orders to take the road to Persepolis and secure the bridges. By the time the sky paled, the rest of us were on the other side of the pass, behind the Persian camp. We were tired, but we'd gotten around them in the night without them seeing us. Ha! You can probably guess what comes next. It is the same trick Alexander played on the Uxians, and it works just as well on the Persians. They fight more fiercely than the Uxians did, but trapped between our 3 strong herds, they don't stand a chance. Eventually, the survivors flee. Alexander gallops me along the road to Persepolis. The guard follow, all still grinning at the way we dominated them. We find Philotas's herd waiting for us at the river. In the distance, the city of Persepolis shimmers white and gold on the Persian plain. Alexander, who had let me ease back to a trot to catch my wind, gathers up my reins again and heads me straight for the bridge, but Zephyr is standing on it, blocking our way. Some of Philotas's men stand behind her. The rest of his herd form up on the bank, nervous, but alert. As we approach, Philotas takes a deep breath and says, "Alex, I'm sorry, but the Persians you chased out of the mountains have forded the river farther north. Persepolis is their holy city. They're not going to give it up without a fight. I think we'd better wait for father." I nicker to Zephyr, pleased to see her. But Alexander scowls at her rider. "What are you playing at, Philo? I told you to secure the bridges so the Persians wouldn't get across, not hold them against me. If we don't hurry, that troublesome satrap will have time to flee with Persepolis' treasure before we get there. Get out of my way." Philotas shakes his head. "We just trekked through the Zagros Mountains in deep snow, negotiated an impossible mountain trail in the dark, and fought 2 battles. These men and horses are exhausted. I think we should camp here and wait for the rest of the army before we tackle Persepolis." "When I want your advice, I'll ask for it," Alexander says in a dangerous tone, narrowing his eyes at Philotas. "Did your father put you up to this? I'm sure I don't need to remind you that I'm in command of this army, not General Parmenio. Move your men off the bridge at once. Before Bucephalus tramples them, I'll deal with you later." Philotas pales but holds Zephyr on a tight rein. The guard stiffen. The men behind Philotas glance at one another and whisper uneasily. "One more page, my love, just a sec. Thank you." My legs feel too wobbly to trample anyone, but I make myself as huge as I can. On my cloth, Alexander tightens his lips and drops his hand to his sword. "No, Alex!" Hephaestion hisses, squeezing Patassios beside me on the narrow bridge so that our riders' knees touch. He grips the king's arm and whispers, "Philo's an idiot to try to hold the bridge against us, but he's right. The men are tired, and poor Bucephalus looks spent. If there's going to be a battle for Persepolis, it makes sense to rest first. I don't mean we should wait for Parmenio in the baggage train, but it wouldn't hurt to let the horses graze and send a party out hunting so we can give the men a hot meal. Alexander might have listened, but just then our Uxian prisoner jeers that the Macedonian army has run out of people to fight, so it's fighting against itself, and makes a run for the bridge. I expect he thought Philotas would hold the bridge long enough for him to escape, but Alexander's legs clamp against my side, and his sword catches the Uxian across the neck before he reaches the first span. The king wheels me off the bridge and jumps me up on a flat rock so he can address the men. He pulls off his helmet so his wild mane blows in the sunlight. As he sweeps his blood-drenched sword toward the city on the other side of the river, he shines with the same power he held when he cut the Gordian knot. Over there's Persepolis, the most powerful, hateful city. Not powerful. The most hateful city in the whole world, he shouts in his shrill voice. That is where the Persians worship demons on their fire altars. That is where the Persian kings make the world bring them treasure and force Greeks to scrape their foreheads on the floor before their proud feet. That city, gentlemen, is the heart of your enemy's power. Destroy it, burn it to the ground, seize all the slaves you want. Go, take your reward, my friends, and wreak your revenge. A ripple goes through the men. They mutter at first, then shout and bang their shields. Revenge! Revenge for our people! Even the Macedonians seem to have forgotten they once fought against Greeks and join in the cry. Philotas knows when he has been dominated. He rides Zephyr out of the way, shaking his head. Father's not going to like this when he gets here, he warns as the cavalry mount up and take off across the bridge with a wild thudding of hooves. Foot soldiers seize their pikes and follow at a run. I plunge against my bit, impatient to follow the herd now that I have my second wind. Hephaestion shouts, "Not the palaces, Alex! Remember, Charm might be in one of them!" Alexander flings Philotas a contemptuous look as he urges me after the others. "Don't touch the palaces," he yells as we catch up with the others. "They're mine."